School leader. Hey, we are in a brand new month, brand new unit, brand new lesson series. Let's see what we got coming up. We are, for 6 weeks, going to be in the book of Ecclesiastes. So the unit title is Finding Meaning, Wisdom from Ecclesiastes. This week's lesson is When Life Feels Empty, out of Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. And the point of the lesson is life without Christ is meaningless. Well, I want to give you an example of how you can do something different in your Sunday school class. And this is probably something that maybe not many people, if any, will do. But this past Sunday, I did a 1-minute lesson on the false religions. And then we transitioned into a wedding. That's right, we had a wedding in our Sunday school class that I officiated. The couple in our Sunday school class had an older couple, both in their 60s. They had met, fell in love. Anyway, she's been a part of our Sunday school class for a while. He had recently come to faith in Christ in our church. And our Sunday school class just really embraced that couple. And so they just thought it was just pretty cool to have that wedding ceremony there with their spiritual family as their witnesses. So anyway, sometimes you can just shake it up and do something a little different. And let me tell you, that'll be more memorable than any Sunday school lesson I've taught, I'm sure. All right, so since we're going to be in this book of Ecclesiastes for 6 weeks, let's just start off with the title, Ecclesiastes. What in the world does that mean? Well, you may have heard through other sermons and whatnot that the Greek word for church is what? Ecclesia, okay? That means the ones called out. Generally, though, the ecclesia Greek word could mean a political assembly of citizens. And when it's applied to an assembly of Christians, it's the church, all right? So that's ecclesia. Then you have words like ecclesiastical, which means it's just relating to the Christian church or the clergy. And then there's the word ecclesiology, which is the theology and nature of or structure of the Christian church. That leads us to Ecclesiastes. What does this mean? It's just a title for one who addresses the assembly or one who addresses the church, okay? So this book of Ecclesiastes is just one book of 5 in that larger set of wisdom literature in the Old Testament. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, Song of Solomon. All 5 of those compose the wisdom poetry section of the Bible. Now this book, Ecclesiastes, was the subject of the January Bible study back in 2012. So if you have the study book for that or some notes maybe that you took or maybe even led that session, you might want to refer back to that for some additional help. Well, since we're going to be in this book for a while, we want to ask who's the author. Well, we can look in verse 1 and see that the writer of this book identifies himself as the teacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, of course, son can mean a physical direct descendant, son, or it could mean just a descendant further down the line, like sons of Abraham, that kind of thing. But as we let's look first at David's biological sons, okay? The ones that had some claim to the throne would have included Absalom. Of course, he never rightfully had claim to the throne, and he really didn't attain old age. We notice as we read through Ecclesiastes, this is an older man who's reflecting back on life and has pursued many things. We look at Adonijah. He was never king. He didn't reach old age either. We have Solomon. We know he reached old age, and we know that he's known for his wisdom. We'll see that later throughout the book. Well, verse 2 starts off with a real positive note, and I say that tongue-in-cheek, sarcastically, because the first phrase used here is meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless, or vanity, vanity of vanities. And that word used there for vanity or meaningless is literally the Hebrew word for breath or vapor, indicating the temporal nature of our lives, how quickly our lives are here and then they're gone. And James 4:14 emphasizes this, doesn't it? That verse says, why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're just a mist that appears for a little while and then it vanishes. Well, one might say that Solomon was the original nihilist or existentialist, but we know that's really not the case. because we know that there is meaning, and Solomon actually comes to this conclusion as well, that there is meaning in life, and we'll see that his conclusion in our very last lesson, in lesson 6 of this series. We look at verse 3, and the question is asked, what do people gain? And that's repeated, I think, about 4 or 5 times throughout the book. And then there's a phrase, under the sun. It's repeated 33 times in this book. And that phrase is used nowhere else in the Old Testament. We might say, in 21st century America, we might say, in this world, or in this life. And this is in our current sinful, fallen condition, because the meaninglessness of life is very clear when we just look at ourselves in our sinful condition. We look at verses 4 through 8, and he talks about the repetitive cycle of things, especially in nature. Things in nature happen over and over and over, and we really don't see any change. Talks about the generations changing, the sunrise, sunset, as the song goes in Fiddler on the Roof. The wind goes here and there and here and there and here and there and circles back again. Streams flow into the ocean. Ocean never fills up. Streams just keep flowing. There's a lot of movement, but no progress. Now, let's just make a note here for your scientifically minded students that, we talk about the sun rises and sets and hurries back to from where it rises. Remember, this is Solomon's observation. Okay, this is not a 21st century science textbook. This is Solomon's observation. As he stands, he looks in the east and sees the sun rises and sets in the west, and then he has no idea that the earth is round and rotation and revolving around the sun. He doesn't know any of that. It appears to him that the sun sets and then somehow scurries back to its place to rise in the east again. All right, we look in verse 9. We see that history repeats itself, and as we get older, we tend to sense this as well. Now, true, we can see change. We can see change, but the change seems to always revert back to something that previously happened. Okay, let me give you an example. American presidents, starting with FDR in the 40s. Here are the parties represented by the presidents. Okay, from FDR as a Democrat. So you got Democrat, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. And see, it just goes back and forth, back and forth. Things change, but it's almost like a pendulum that swings back and forth. There's movement, but there's no progress. Now we look down at verse 11, and I think we all want to be remembered and cherished by our relatives, by our descendants, by the people who are going to come after us. But it says here, no one remembers former generations. And then he says that, and that's going to be true of future generations who look back and won't remember us as well. Now, unless you are a genealogy buff, unless that's your hobby, family history is your bag, you probably know little, if anything, about your great-grandparents. And even going back to great-great, we just don't know that much about those people who came before us. Also, you might know that the Patriots beat the Rams in this year's Super Bowl, but unless you're a sports enthusiast, you probably don't remember who won the 2012 World Series or the 2008 Super Bowl. If so, you'd have to think about it and go back. You see, the victories of today are forgotten tomorrow. We look down at verses 12 and 13. We see some more indication here that Solomon is the author of this, because he talks about being the king in Jerusalem and that he explored wisdom. There again, Solomon known for his wisdom. Verse 13 and 14, in fact, I'm assuming that Solomon is the author here, so I will say that from time to time that's Solomon the author. I'm just making that assumption. Verse 13 and 14, we see that Solomon studied everything. He gained knowledge, he gained wisdom. So the teacher here, he's educated, he's wise, and it seemed like the more he learned, the more he couldn't explain. And maybe you've realized this too, that the more you know about something, the less you know about something. As an example, the more I learn, the more you learn probably about God, the more you realize, man, I don't have a clue. I don't know anything about God. Now, in our future lessons, we're going to see that Solomon unpacks several of these areas that he investigated. We're going to look at the futility or the problem of pleasure, wisdom, work, wealth. And those things are not necessarily bad, but they're just not ultimately fulfilling. And that's what he's looking for here. He's looking for something that's going to bring him ultimate satisfaction. And it just doesn't happen. Even our hunger, we eat and we're satisfied for a moment with that, whatever your favorite food is, for that steak or that ice cream sundae or whatever. And that is very fleeting, isn't it? Just very short. Solomon ends the book with a conclusion of what brings true fulfillment. And like I said, we'll see that in lesson number 6. A couple of questions you might think about for your class is, what is it in our lives today that causes us or causes other people to have those feelings of futility? And how do some people deal with those feelings? Maybe people who aren't church people, who aren't or don't have that relationship with Christ. All right, don't forget to pray for your class, and you never know, you may have a couple in there that want to get married, so might brush up on your wedding vows too. All right, appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching.